Welcome to the White Knuckle Podcast with your hosts, Jason Science and Dr. Clint McCoy.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the White Knuckle Podcast. Tonight is episode number 125. Tonight, I have Dr. Clint McCoy on the other line down there in Southern Illinois. Clint, how's it going?
Good, man. I am living my best socially distant life as I possibly can currently.
Amen. And joined with us is the world-famous Jeff Fredricks from Holman, Wisconsin.
Yeah, Holman area, out in the hills there in western Wisconsin.
How's it going, Jeff?
Good.
So it's that time of year. It seems like it's been that time of year for a while now because we've actually had an early spring, really, haven't we? Wouldn't you say, Clint?
Absolutely.
Jeff? Yeah. It's
yeah, same. Yeah, yep, definitely.
How do you think, both of you guys, how do you think that this weather pattern that we have this year versus the last 2 or 3 years that we've had, how is it going to make first season different?
It'll make it a lot nicer.
You mean, not sitting in 4 inches of snow. That would be a nice change.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love early springs because what that says to me is that we're going to have a nice flock in the future. Because I believe that the sooner the hens can get their nest established and get things going, and if we have a nice dry spring, we're going to have a better hatch. Turkey populations are driven primarily by how good the hatch is.
And Clint, how is the turkey population by you?
Over the last 20 years, we've gone from very few huntable flocks to now they're pretty plentiful. And, we'll be in birds every time we're out if you do your homework now, which is crazy to think about because when I first started hunting 20 years ago, it wasn't that way. Turkey hunting, I should say. But the last couple springs we've had down here last year was exceedingly wet. We had an awful, just abysmal hatch. I was getting trail camera photos of hens that should have had poults in June and July. They're just walking around twiddling their thumbs, our numbers are fair, but the weather, just like Jeff said, man, the weather is certainly, I feel like the number one drive for a successful hatch is a proper spring.
Yeah. I don't know, 5, 6, we had a real early spring, I forget exactly what year, but a few years back, and I remember I was scouting some land in Richland County before first season, and we kicked a hen off of a nest. She was already nesting. So, and I remember that year was probably the best hatch I had ever witnessed. So I'm in the camp of, I do love early springs. And not just for the selfish reasons that the hunting weather is so much nicer.
Right. Does that make the later seasons tougher?
It's, in my opinion, it's very weather dependent. If it gets into the 90s, and it's full on summer, yeah. Do I think sixth season is going to be hard to hunt? Most likely. I think to some extent, especially in younger birds, that just, the earlier the hatch, the earlier the hens are successful finishing their clutches, the quicker the testosterone in the gobblers starts dropping, especially in younger birds. I do believe, similar to white-tailed deer, that the older gobblers that have been around and know the breeding game, I do think from the evidence that I've seen is they must keep their testosterone up, because if you can hit a really late season bird and he's aggressive, it's probably an older turkey.
Interesting. Clint,
Yeah, Jeff. Hey, let me pick your brain real quick, Jeff, about just general turkey, especially hen reproductive biology for some of the listeners that may not know. What, we talk about, a lot of us are whitetailers first and foremost, and turkey hunters secondarily. You're the opposite. You're the turkey
Hey, I
guy.
like your hunting too, though.
Yeah. But I think we use the rut analogy, that it's, quote, timed almost the same every year for deer, and that just doesn't work for what my brothers and I jokingly call the turkey rut. Like it can, their breeding season can vary. Can you tell us some of the factors that influence that?
Well, I personally believe it is a little closer to the rut. As far as from what I've read, the biologists have identified is it's the photo period as the days get longer.
Yep.
And I know for a fact, even last year when, I don't know, what did we have, Jason? A foot and a half of snow? During the youth hunt, it was horrible
ridiculous.
up here. But there were lone hens. The 2-3 days I saw them driving around, and it was before that giant snowstorm. When you see a lone hen walking across the field at 10 o'clock in the morning, she's going to her nest. I know that. And I believe that no matter what the weather is like, that hens are squatting for toms in Wisconsin by the second week of March. I mean, I've witnessed it, I've seen it, and I think a lot of it has to do with the age of the hen, and I think that the photo period is what, the day length is what triggers all that stuff happening in the turkey world. Now, granted, those hens that laid some eggs and then had a foot and a half of snow, and it did not go away quickly. I got to believe that they gave up on those nests. Yeah.
Right. Right.
But this year it's looking like all them hens that are laying eggs probably by now are, hopefully they're going to have a good nesting season.
Did we have a pretty poor nesting season last year, or we did, didn't we?
So at first, it always surprises me. And obviously I keep my eyes open. But I saw no poults last summer. The weather was terrible. I just figured it was not going to be good. But now, amazingly enough, I'm seeing a good amount of jakes across the state. The little traveling I've been able to do, I have seen quite a few jakes. So obviously, there was some hatching going on. And I think what happened is just from looking at the jakes is I think some hens did hatch some poults out prior to that late June wet event, that heavy rains in late June. Mm-hmm. And those are big 20-pound jakes right now. And then there's little 12-pound scrubs. Mm-hmm. And I think the majority of the hatch came off in July and in early August. So, but I think a lot of it has to do with is the age of the hen turkeys on the landscape. I think them old hens are just, they know the game. They do such a great job at picking a nest site, hatching their young and raising them up. I think those old hens on the landscape are real important to keep good poult survival going.
Well, let's talk about. First of all, let's talk about how your fall went last year, Jeff. Tell us what happened for deer, because you don't just hunt turkeys.
No. I kind of like hunting deer and everything else, but unfortunately, I picked up a part-time job. I worked at Silent Outdoors. It's a archery pro shop in Sparta. And for some reason, I didn't find myself out in the woods very much, which was very frustrating because I had a deer on camera that I really, really, really wanted to dedicate more time to. Long story short, I met up with him on the last day of the muzzleloader season, and biggest buck of my life.
Yeah, it was. It was a nice deer. Clint, did you see it?
I did not. I'll have to look at it. I'm sure I did.
Yeah, you commented. I made sure. I said, "Oh, Clint commented. Yay!"
Like my opinion matters.
He's so modest, Jeff. He knows he's a big deal. I mean, he writes for North American Whitetail, for God's sakes.
Exactly.
Just yeah. Anyway, well, I wanted to talk about your style of hunting because I learned a whole new style of hunting last year that I hadn't done in the past, and I wanted to see how your methodology and Clint's methodology differ, and how my plan to hunt this year may or may not work in your guys' opinion. So whoever wants to start out, let's start with Clint. Give us a rundown of what would be a typical day for you, Clint. How are you you're gonna roost the bird, then what happens from there?
Yeah, I mean, in Illinois where we're at, we have a 1 o'clock curfew. 1 p.m. we've got to be out of the woods. And a few states still do that, and we can't hunt until dark. So every evening after I get off the office, I'm diving into the timber at 5:30 or whenever I can get there, and just sit and observe. It may not be deep in the timber. I may be watching a flock and seeing where they're headed, or if I'm trying to figure out a flock, I'll dive deep and listen to them and observe them and see who I'm dealing with. But I will roost every single night. We went and went and put some to bed this evening here. It's not quite dark tonight, but my season opens tomorrow morning, so I've got a handful of intel points there I'm going to try and work on. But it's a roost game for us. We call it beat the clock. You got to be out by 1 o'clock, and if you don't get him off the roost, and he joins up with a bunch of hens, and then you have that lull period where they're just not doing squat. You can't get them to break and can't get them to do much for your call. Then we'll come back about mid morning once those hens, like Jeff said, are going off the nest and leaving those gobblers looking. And try and work them that way. And the most stressful day is when you don't get one and it's noon, and we call it the lightning round, the hour between 12 and 1 p.m. We call it the lightning round. Anything goes.
That's cool. Yeah.
I remember
them days.
We used to only be able to hunt till noon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like the ability to hunt a full day because I don't hunt a full day. I can pick an hour, if I can get out at 5 o'clock until 6:30 in the afternoon.
Sure.
I don't write off any time of the day anymore up here in Wisconsin. I have shot turkeys in literally every time of the day since they stopped closing at noon here.
Mm-hmm.
To answer your original question, my hunting strategies are highly dependent upon the terrain and the individual piece of property I'm hunting. I have places that I can hunt that I very shortly realized I pretty much had to hunt out in the middle of a field with a blind. And they're great farms. They're great places to turkey hunt. and I figured out some really great setup locations out in the middle of open fields where they love to hang out. I also have different properties where you're hunting more in the woods. And at that point, I put my gun on my shoulder. I got a couple mouth calls and a nice pad to sit on. And, I'll typically have a couple of places that I know I want to slowly walk to. This is a pretty good spot. I'll sit down and I'll try and call there for an hour. And then I'll move to plan B or something like that. I do personally, I love hunting in that fashion where it's a little bit more of a freelance. I personally hate the term run and gun because it tends to make people think of impatience. The most deadly turkey hunter is the mobile turkey hunter that knows how to sit still long enough to let the turkey come in. But I prefer a real loose freelance style of hunting where I can just freely move about the landscape. It's fun. You're taking a nice walk in nature and you happen to be turkey hunting at the same time. But I also really enjoy sitting in a blind and watching three gobblers come charging into my decoys I make. That's cool too. So,
how important do you think decoy setups are to the overall?
In a wide open field with a blind, it's completely. I rely on it tremendously.
Sure. What about in the timber?
When I'm hunting in that fashion, and then there's going to be times too when but it's all kind of pre-thought out. It's pre-planned. Mm-hmm. If I know I'm going to hunt a certain property a certain way, that's typically what I stick to and I do.
Mm-hmm. Clint, how about you?
Same for us down here in, broken farm country. It's much flatter down where I'm at than it is up there in you guys' neck of the country. And we've got a lot of open fields and cow pastures and little grass nooks. And, man, if you want to kill a field bird, it's decoy dependent a lot of the times, to get them to break. And, I think one of the keys for us, we have enough roll in our ground is setting your decoys up to where they can be visualized from long distance. Don't put your decoys in a hole. They're not doing you any good. Don't pack them if you're going to put them in a hole.
Yep.
So like Jeff said, it's got to be semi-tactically pre-thought out. Like actually, you may be in there a day or two before roosting birds or something and sit down against a tree and say, well, if I can sit here and put my stakes here, can they see it from other directions? And using that terrain advantage for your fakes is a good way to do it. And you can really get yourselves, you can get a lot of great action around decoys in these broken farm country like we're at. But to answer your question about, do you take one in the timber with you? Maybe, I tend not to in the timber. And if I do, I'm probably packing a half strut Jake or something like that just for a visual. But I feel like in the timber, especially now that it's starting to flesh out, it's the visual. If they have a hard time seeing it, they don't have motion with it. Why pack the extra? But our in farm country like we're at, we rely on them a lot.
Sure. Yeah, when I'm in the woods, and that's the way Jason and I'm sure Jason, you too. I mean, that's kind of how we learned how to hunt. Is you kind of play the chess match in the woods. You use terrain and cover, and you want to get the bird literally pretty darn close to in range before he can see your position or the position of the calling hen. That's kind of the game you play. One thing that I do a lot when I am freelance type hunting and woods hunting is that I will do micro moves as a bird is approaching sometimes, you get that nervous feeling. It's because you don't know exactly how fast they're coming in sometimes, but I have found over the years it's well worth taking a little bit of a risk and repositioning if you just get that subconscious feeling that this setup ain't quite where I need it to be, is to quick make a micro move, go back 10 yards, forward 10 yards to the side, hit a different tree. I usually will be sitting there and I look at a different tree and I'm like, maybe the view is better from that tree. I better get there right now.
Exactly.
I mean, and that's what makes that kind of hunting so fun is it's the thought process that's going on in your own mind.
Well, last year, I believe it was the first season. No, actually it wasn't. I think it was third season. When I had some of the white knuckle guys in camp from Iowa, and then I had Jackson, my son, with me. And Clint and you and I did, I think, a podcast last year where we talked about you talked about those micro moves a little bit, and Clint and I were talking after that, and I think Clint, you had killed a bird by moving around a little bit, and I ended up having to do that, and I eventually killed the bird. But had I had not moved, I wouldn't have killed him. Is there a rule of thumb that you that either of you operate by in terms of when it's time to move, or is it just common sense? Like if he's not coming in, and it's safe.
There's a question. There's a question. Here's what I've learned over the years. If you don't trust your gut instinct, you are going to screw up.
Yeah.
More often than not, I get a funny feeling and I don't act on it, and I realize shortly thereafter I should have.
Right. I'm exactly the same, Jeff. My boy and I were out this morning youth hunting, and we had some birds get away from us and get out to an open field, and the terrain was going to just totally smoke us, and there was no way we could move on them. And so he and I sat there and talked about it, and it's listening to that voice of learning how to tone that voice out that says, get up and go, get up and move, like recognizing how many times you've screwed it up in the past, and really learning what not to do helps me more than the times I've learned and done it right. You know what I mean? You tend to recognize your mistakes before you're fixing to make them, if that makes any sense.
It does. And you want to know, here's something I've been telling people in my seminars, and I've got a feeling that people are going away shaking their head going, huh? But this is the honest truth, guys. The honest to God truth about the turkey hunting game and why I love it so much is ultimately the turkey wins most of the time. That's why we love it so much. If we won most of the time, it would lose its fire. But I'm telling you, I love the fact that that old gobbler, how dang it, he won again.
Exactly.
And it just makes, when it does come into place, when everything falls into place, and you dupe that big old longbeard, that's why we jump up and hoot and holler, and you get that blood pumping. You hear your heart hammering in your ears when you see the tip of his tail there just over the brush. And
Let me get back to the decoy thing a little bit here.
Okay.
In recent years, you see a lot more of the use of a fan and things of that nature. How much stock do you put into that kind of stuff?
Okay, so here's the thing about, here's my general, what I say about a fan is, if you look at the black line in the turkey's tail, there's a little spot of iridescence on them feathers, and I from all the research that I've done, I don't think we as humans can start to even imagine how important and significant visual cueing is through their iridescence. I mean, and if you watch a gobbler and a hen, a gobbler strutting for a hen, and you watch how they move their bodies and position each other, the more and more I think about it and research ultraviolet vision and iridescence, I truly believe that there's a lot more communication going on than we fully understand by turkeys looking at each other. So that's a long way around the fact that me saying that here's why the real turkey tail works really good is because it's got that iridescence in it. I'm convinced of that. A couple issues I have with fans is if you're statically sitting in a blind and a lower pecking order gobbler comes in, it is a little bit more aggressive pose where, I make my decoys and I prefer to have a more submissive tail down, lower head posture on my male turkey decoys. The other thing is, and I'm not going to berate the reaping style of hunting other than the fact that Jason, back in, let's see, what would it have been, 1986? I remember going to the DNR's turkey seminar. No one in Wisconsin knew how to turkey hunt, so the DNR put on these little programs to teach us how to turkey hunt and the safety. And I know that there's not many accidents that have happened with the reaping, but just the fact that you are hiding yourself with something that someone else could potentially shoot at eliminates that from my list of things that I will do, just for the pure fact of safety. That's all I'm going to say about that. Clint?
Similar. We don't use it. We don't use it all that often. We try it every now and again, but when we do so, it's on private farms that we know we're probably alone on, and we're out in the middle of we're going to be out in the middle of wide open where nobody could launch a 60-yarder at you.
Yeah.
It works, and it's a hell of a lot of fun trying it. It really is. You get those stubborn birds that darn good and well you can't